So that is, to me, is answer to this question about when will the end come. Does that make sense to people? Does that,
Yes.
is that helpful? Is there any questions you've got? We'll take a pause and we'll decide if we want to go on to the next section. If you want to come back with me, this would be a good moment to come back and look at that piece and ask any questions or make any comments.
Okay, couple of things. One, we've been privileged to know a number of folk who have been translating the Bible into various languages and so on. And one of the clear things is that there's a lot of folk out there who haven't heard the gospel. But as you were speaking, it struck me that this phrase there, verse 14, preach to all the world, that would marry with the two witnesses in Revelation. And at that point, it would seem to me that sure as eggs are eggs, everybody will have heard the message.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if it's tied up with the two witnesses, to be honest, John. I've not thought about it, but certainly they seem to have a role at that point.
I'm not necessarily. I'm not saying that's the point, but certainly at that point, everybody will have heard. They might have heard before, of course.
Yeah.
But at that point, the whole world will have heard one way or another.
Yeah.
Or one can assume it does say nations rather than individuals, so which is interesting.
Well, let's remember that word nations is Gentiles.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those words that the translators put their spins on it.
Yeah.
All Gentiles, but there are times the nation of Israel is still the same word.
It's the heathens.
Well, is it? Yeah. Is it the heathens or is it all peoples? It is a frustrating word to tie down.
Yeah.
And it's often our translation that gives us the spin that it means in every nation. It just means all the people, possibly all the non-Jews, but there's an argument that it also means amongst the Jews as well.
Indeed.
So,
I've heard it translated as people groups, which to me makes sense because it means all those people groups will have their own languages, and it might be easy to think, well, the gospel has obviously gone to all nations at the moment, but not people groups. I mean, there are people groups living in the rainforest and this sort of thing. That's how I understood it. So it needs to be preached in all languages to all people groups. Yeah.
It seems Strong suggests its first meaning is a race.
Right.
As of the same habit, or a tribe. It's especially a foreign, non-Jewish one, but by implication pagan, Gentile, heathen nation people. But as I say, the nation of Israel is the ethnos of Israel. It isn't a different word.
And another point, going back, it was mentioned about false messiahs, and it doesn't really say, but one can assume these are false Jewish messiahs, but they could be false non-Jewish messiahs, I guess, too. But Bar Kokhba in about 130 or thereabouts was reckoned to be a messiah. Certain rabbis said that he was. And more recently, in the 90s, I suppose it was, or early 2000s, there was a guy in New York who was deemed to be the Messiah, but of course, there were a whole host of them in between. So, and this guy Schneerson, it's almost like a political party that you'll see banners for in Israel and elsewhere.
In Cheetah Mill in Manchester, I remember seeing them.
Yeah. So it's yeah, and they kind of wonder why he's still dead.
Hasn't come back yet.
He hasn't come back yet, so there's something going on there. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, there are many faithful still, as it were.
Any other comments, folks? Any other observations?
Just a couple of observations, really. if I
Yeah,
may.
John.
In that verse 14, taking apart the sentence there to some extent, the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations. In and to, I think that's worthy of some consideration.
Right.
That covers there. And the other was a simple point, really, about this word tribulation. What transformed my understanding of it was the fact that in Revelation 1, verse 9, our brother John is on Patmos, and he tells us the reason why he's there. And fundamentally, tribulation right from his day through to the present time. Just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah. That is worth noting, really. But what does it say there?
He says, I, John, both your brother and companion, in the tribulation and kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Was on the island that is called Patmos for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's verse 9, Revelation 1, verse 9. Companion in the tribulation.
Yeah, and the article is there.
Yeah. So John saw himself as in the tribulation.
Yeah.
Very, very much worth thinking about. Any other comments, or do you want to have? Do you have stamina to go on for the next few verses?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, verse 15 to 22. Would somebody like to read it, please?
I'm happy to.
Go on then, Rose.
Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to get the things out that are in his house. And let him who is in the field not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are with child and to those who nurse babes in those days. But pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever shall. And unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days shall be cut short.
Thank you. So, we start this section with a reference to Daniel, and then a very specific instruction that is geographically tied down. So let's look at verse 16 first. Where is Judea?
Right.
Yeah.
Right of.
Sorry?
On the mountains of Israel.
It's the mountains of Israel. And in the kind of in the center of it is which city? Jerusalem, right?
Mm.
So which of the three questions is he speaking in answer to here? Is it not the one about when will these things be? When will the temple be thrown down? When will Jerusalem be destroyed? This is, to me, this is why I say it's helpful to work through this passage with those three questions in mind. He is here speaking, giving instructions to the people who would be in Jerusalem when the temple was going to be destroyed. And as far as I understand it, history notes that when Jerusalem fell, the Christians had left before it fell. And because they understood this to be a very practical instruction. And it begins with when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. Where is Jesus quoting from when he says this? It's Daniel. Daniel 12:11. And this is the end of the book, right? I think, yeah. He says, verse 9, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. I'm not going to read the rest because I absolutely cannot work out what those numbers apply to. But here is the reference that Jesus is going back to. He's saying, Daniel's told you that there is going to be this time. Now, a lot of people think this was fulfilled with Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And that he was the one who defiled the temple and so on. But Jesus is quoted speaking of it about in the future. So whether that was a foretaste of it, he saw something else, and in context with Daniel, he also sees it as Daniel was told it was going to be something that would also bring an end to the daily sacrifices. And I think it is true. I know it's true that since the fall of Jerusalem, the Jews have not been able to perform daily sacrifices. So whatever Antiochus Epiphanes did, it wasn't the end of the sacrifices, but AD 70 was. And that is still the situation today. So he's referring back to that as something they would see happening, and that would be the time for them not to hang around, but to get out. Now, why should they think otherwise? Well, I was in a meeting last night of Christian home educators from South Africa, and we were commenting at the start about the political chaos in this country and in theirs. And somebody said, that's why we need to pray for revival. And I can imagine the Jews having the same attitude. This is getting really bad. God, we need you to revive us. But there are times, you know, when God says, no, I'm not going to revive you. You have brought this judgment upon yourself. And clearly did. Jesus had prophesied it. At the end of Matthew 23, he told them that they were going to reap judgment. There was no revival going to return, do that. And so he's wanting them to see that when this moment arrives, that is the judgment that he said was going to happen would begin. And he says to them, if you're in Judea, get out to the mountains. Don't even go back into the house to get your gear. Don't go back to the house from the field. But I'm warning those who are pregnant and nursing babies in those days. It will be hard for you. And then he says, and pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. What's he saying? Pray that God will show you it's time to go when it's easy to travel. Very practical, right? And so this is not about the end of the age. It's not about the sign of his coming. It is about getting out of Jerusalem before the temple is thrown down. Does that make sense? Anybody wants to come back in on that?
Yeah, that sounds fine. The
That's
additional info is that, or at least some of it, we're a little heard some of it, that actually the believers did get out of Jerusalem, and they went to Pella, not Petra, and as a result, they were considered to be traitors to the Jewish cause, which then caused them some difficulty later in following years, particularly because the Romans kept hammering them, you know, in the Bar Kokhba rebellion of 135 or so, and so on. And yeah, indeed, the Romans did actually, well, they changed the name of Jerusalem, and that was later on, 135, 36, and they also changed the name of the land to Syria Palestina, and the Jerusalem to
Aelia Capitolina.
Aelia Capitolina. So we're suffering from those changes even up to today, of course, as are very much the Jewish people. But during the other difficulties in relation with the Romans, the believers were effectively ostracized and couldn't be relied on to be part and parcel of any defense or whatever. Well, that's how they were considered by the other Jewish people. So that's our understanding of the details, some of the details of what happened around that time, because they took notice of what Jesus had said.
Yeah. Yeah. So they were there, right? So that is fairly clear. But where people get confused is verse 21 and 22. What is Jesus saying to them here? And again, he quotes from Daniel. When he says, for then there will be great tribulation, such has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor ever shall be. Many people want to put that still into the future and to say that, well, if it's never been, well, it must be in the future. But if you know Daniel, you'll recognize that this is a quotation from Daniel 12. Right? Let me read it for you. At that time, Daniel 12:1, at that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time, your people shall be delivered, every one who is found written in the book. So notice the phraseology is the same. There will be a time of trouble, such as there has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor shall ever be. And it's my suggestion, my conviction, that what Jesus was saying to them was, don't think the fall of Jerusalem will be the end of the troubles. I'm pointing you back to Daniel again. And God told Daniel that even at that time, right, after at that time, there will be an extended period of trouble worse than anything you've been through up to now. And I think we can say for the Jews, that has been their experience. And it's been mirrored by the church being persecuted in many different parts of the world. The West has just not had it for 300 or 400 years, but many Christians have been persecuted throughout the period from AD 70 to today. And it has been a time of tribulation. It's not been a time of this peace the disciples were expecting because they were good Jews. They were expecting Messiah to come and bring peace. And Jesus is saying, no, you don't understand the scriptures. The scriptures are that after Jerusalem falls, there is going to be trouble. And a verse that stands out for me is Daniel 9:26. Not wanted to go into the most of the verse, but just the end phrase, right? And after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the Prince of the Peace who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. Or as the New American Standard puts it, even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. And that is about the city and the sanctuary. And even to this day, Jerusalem is not a place of peace. Salem, it is not a place of peace, it is a place of war and desolations. And so Jesus is really here taking to pieces their Jewish view of Messiah. He's actually saying to them, don't think I've come to bring peace at this time. I have come to prepare the way for that time of tribulation which Daniel was told about. And they would have made that connection. But then he says to them, you better be praying that those days will be shortened. Because if they're not, no one would come through them. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. So, I don't know if you've had that take on those verses before. It's taken me a long time to come to it because I didn't approach this passage fresh first time I read it. I'd got other people telling me what it meant, and it's taken me a long time to get my own head where I feel more settled with it. But again, let's have a bit of time of feedback, questions, comments.
Well, I don't know what else, of course, you've said all night, but to me, all these three, there's only one of the three accounts that actually splits it into three. The other two just split it into two. And after this particular devastation, the Lord comes back. So to me, it's describing both of these things. And the fact that you can't unravel the two different things. I mean, Luke 21 is obviously describing the end times as well. But it tells you that they're going to be dispersed until the times of the Gentiles are over. But it's certainly not straightforward, and I didn't expect it to be straightforward. But as he comes back after this particular tribulation, this is I know people who think that Daniel 12 was the fall of Jerusalem, but the Lord comes back and everyone's resurrected and there's judgment. That can't possibly be at the fall of Jerusalem, but that's all at the beginning of Daniel 12. So it's I don't claim to understand. I just know that it accounts for both times, for the end times and this times, and it's not obviously always obvious which is talking about which. Certain things like the fleeing in the winter seems to be talking about Jerusalem itself. And of course, we know in Zechariah that half the Jews are going to flee anyway, if we take that literally in Zechariah. And half the Jews stay in Jerusalem, half of them flee. That's a very difficult one to get your head around. Yes. I think there's a lot of difficult things to get your head around. And my head's certainly not in the best position to do it at the moment. So I've had 4 migraines this week, so I'm even more, what's the term? Vacant. Vacant, that's the term. But I'm sure there are others here that think these are all talking about both occasions as well, surely. You've got to take all three together, aren't you? I mean, that's the first question, of course, is do you think that these are all that Matthew, Luke and Mark are talking about the same talk? I mean, did he give this address a couple of different times?
He may well have done. What we've done, Philip, while you weren't here, is actually start in Matthew 3 and quickly hop through various places to see how Matthew, who is speaking particularly to Jewish readers, builds up this picture. And then in Matthew 23, Jesus begins to give them the very opposite of what they were expecting.
Oh, yeah.
And this then flows on from their questions there, where I don't think in the others you have that connection.
No.
So I think we have to take that in that sense there.
I've got one of those integrated gospels somewhere, but I don't know if it's actually that useful.
I've got one as well, and it can be sometimes, but I don't think it will on this, because it has to chop them around and take them out of context.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I have no problem with this multi-leveled approach, because that's what Isaiah does, isn't it? And Jeremiah, they do it all the time.
Yeah, but I
work out where Isaiah's at, it's very difficult.
I do think when you're given a context in a passage, you should read that, you should understand that context and interpret the passage from the dynamics of the context it's delivered in, not just lift it out and try and patch it with the others.
Yeah.
Any other comments, folks? I think we're all stunned or something.
Can I thank you for? I had to work out whether. Sorry, Karen. Go on,
Go on, John.
No. Thank you for a careful analysis of this. It's like you mentioned, you were told from all directions many years ago, I guess, how to interpret this passage. And I found it important to unlearn a great deal and to sit down with this passage and basically to go to the Lord. And it's between the Lord and his word, and struggle in many cases because all the stuff that one has heard in the past keeps getting in the way. So I thank you for teasing out the important distinction that's here, because if we've got questions and we've got answers, it's so important to know what which answer applies to which question. Some years ago, I saw a comedy sketch, basically where the person answered the previous question each time, and it was absolute nonsense. You can imagine that, a series of questions and somebody answered the previous one. Absolute madness it was. And sadly, many of the answers that are often given to the Lord Jesus' questions have been in that wrong order. I thought some time ago that this was an important matter, and as I said, I'm grateful to you for making this clarification of which question applies to which answer. It makes far more sense because, of course, the question gives us the context. In many cases, it derives from that context, and the answer must apply to that context, or else they're disjointed in some way. It's not doing this very well, but in effect, it ought to be clear. If we look at the three questions and the three answers that the Lord gives, if you sort of move them around a bit and look at the context, they seem to fall naturally, if I dare use that word in this company, they seem to fall naturally into a certain pattern, which is the one that I think you've been presenting this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think my feeling is that for a long time was not the three questions were not even put forward as being answered. As I said, I think it starts at most people's exposition of Matthew 24 begins at verse 4, and everything gets bundled together.
Yeah.
And that has caused confusion, but also tied in with dispensational teaching, which basically says these do not happen during the church age. They happen they begin to happen during the church age, but the real bad bits begin during the restored Jewish week that's missing at the end from their history, which I think is a total construct. It's not actually there in scripture. And everything is there for the Jews then. Makes a mockery of what both the Jews and the church has been through for the last 2,000 years.
Yes.
I'd like to throw in just as a little thought to confuse. Maybe I can't remember where I read it, but I read recently that often when translators use the word then, they could just as easily have used the word and. So if you're reading along and you see the word then, think and it just takes all of this chronology out of it to think that all of these things could be happening simultaneously. Say from verse 20, but pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, and there will be a great tribulation. And going down to 23, well, reading the end of 22, it says, but for the sake of the elect, those days shall be cut short. And if anyone says to you, behold, there's the Christ, do not believe him. It just takes, I guess it makes it more panic stricken that it could be all happening at once. But it does remove that idea that this is going to happen, then that will happen, and then that will happen. And that may not be what God has in mind.
There is a great problem with translating both Hebrews and Greek into English, because the tense and the smaller words are always vague. And
I'm
so,
not there.
Or not there.
you know, and so this sense of and then or after or things like that is a real difficult one. You can't be precise with it. And so if it sometimes it can mean the opposite to what they're saying, sometimes it doesn't, and it is a confusion, but it is helpful sometimes to see that it is not a progressive thing, it is a bundle together.
Mm.
Anything else?
Just wonder if you could put the screen up again, the second one.
The second one.
Yeah.
Yep, just give me a minute, John. I will.
Because I was making notes and I couldn't scribble hard enough, fast enough.
Okay, let me screen share.